All right. Hello and welcome back. All right. We talked about locations in the United States, national parks that are excellent examples of weathering and erosion. They are world famous for the geology in that area. And today, what I want to talk about are places that are, in my opinion, just as amazing, but they are found all within our state of Ohio. So in this case, we're not going to be in a car traveling for 30 hours to go see this. This is all in Ohio, 4 hours tops, right? Excuse me. So here's our great seal of Ohio. Here's our flag. Wonderful. Okay, Caesar Creek is our first place we're going to be talking about. And from this picture, it may not seem all that incredible, but Caesar Creek really is. Caesar Creek is about 56 minutes from here. We're going to be driving north. Here we are in Amelia. We're going to go up that way. Sorry. And there we are. We'd be right at Caesar Creek. And I want you to notice on this map here that they show that lake there. That's important for what we're going to be taking a look at. What is interesting about Caesar Creek is it's essentially it's a man-made lake at this point. So what we're looking at is an aerial view. This is a road here. This is the visitor center. I'm going to mention that in a moment. Driving through here, this is a dam that blocks off the original Caesar Creek. And you can see there's part of this spillway right here where they're going to regulate some of the water. This was built to prevent flooding in other areas, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But this is what it looks like if you were to go there. Caesar Creek was created, like I said, to um, limit the flooding that was going on in the area. So I think it was back in the 70s this happened, and what happened was this dam was built, and it allowed this creek to fill up and make a lake, and that helped flooding downriver a little bit more. But what was interesting about this is that there were towns that were built in that area that were going to be flooded. So this is a copy of a notice that was posted in these areas letting people know that eventually this place would be flooded. So down in portions of the lake, there are going to be remnants of homes that were in the valley that were flooded when this creek flooded. It's really neat to think about that. All right, so this is what makes Caesar Creek so amazing for the geology of Ohio. When the spillway was built, and I want to show you, this is the spillway. So if that lake fills up, this is going to be where the water that drains over the top is going to go. That's the spillway. And when that happened, it exposed massive amounts of fossils from the Ordovician time period. This is something we're going to talk about later on in science. These are animals that lived on Earth long before the dinosaurs. We're talking about 500 million years ago. And I'm not going to go into detail about what these animals are because that's going to be coming later on in science. But these are extinct ocean animals, and you can find their fossils all over the place in Caesar Creek. And what's neat about it is that you can even go to the visitor center and get a permit that will allow you to collect fossils and bring them home. The rule is it has to be able to fit in your hand. So, for example, this animal right here, this fossil was found at Caesar Creek, and it's one of the best examples of that species ever found. It's larger than your hand, so the person who found it could not take it home. And I'm glad that they were honest with that because then they were able to share it with the world. So these are good examples of fossils found there. Here is a artist's idea of what Caesar Creek would have looked like about 500 million years ago. Not just really that area, but all of Ohio. But we'll get to that later, right? So this is an idea of what this area would have looked like. So Caesar's Creek is a great place to go fossil hunting if you ever get a chance to do that. Our next place is called Clifton Gorge, and I did not know much about Clifton Gorge up until a couple years ago, and it's a really neat place to go hiking. You can go hiking down along the bottom where the water is causing more weathering and erosion, but you can also go hiking up above, but you have to be careful because you'd be hiking along a cliff. It is about an hour and a half away, so not too far away. You're going to be in the car for a little bit longer. And Clifton Gorge is really neat for many reasons. One, you can see here the geology of it. This little portion here of the river is causing weathering and erosion. Here are the cliffs they're talking about. So in theory, and there are stories of people jumping from one side of the cliff to the other, there are also stories of people really hurting themselves by doing that. So if you ever go, do not do that. That is a bad idea. But this water is causing weathering and it's causing erosion, and it's making that gap even wider and even deeper. What's neat about Clifton Gorge as well is that there's a history to it where people built mills over 100 years ago that used the flow of this water to turn a wheel. You can see the wheel here, and that turning wheel would grind things like corn or anything else that they needed, or even operate some machinery for like a blacksmith. So this is kind of a neat part of Clifton Gorge. Okay, another amazing place in Ohio, and I did not know about this, and very few people don't know about this. And out of all of them, I think this is the one I would encourage everybody to go to because it is so unusual from anything else that we see in Ohio, and it's Cedar Bog. Okay, cedar for the tree, and then a bog. It's actually a mistake in the naming of it. I'll talk about that. What makes Cedar Bog so interesting? It's not too far away, about an hour and a half, like Clifton Gorge, just a little bit north of Dayton. Clifton Gorge is out around this way, but Cedar Bog is incredible because it is home to a variety of plants and animals that only live in that part of Ohio. That's it. So these plants and these animals don't live in other parts of Ohio. They only live in this one little pocket of Ohio. That's it. So for example, this plant right here, it's a sundew plant. Excuse me, this is a carnivorous plant. So this is a plant that has these leaves with these sticky little drops of sap on them, right? Imagine that. And insects land on them, and then the leaf curls around it. So think of a Venus flytrap, for example. It's very similar to that. Species of frogs, species of turtles, species of plants like called skunk cabbage, for example. This shot here, you can see some of it growing up, and this skunk cabbage generates its own heat so it can start growing earlier in the year. And these animals and plants only live in this area because of the geology. So that's a really neat thing about Cedar Bog. Cedar Bog, you have to walk on a walkway, not because of the reasons like if Yellowstone, if you step off the walkway, you will get in trouble, but your feet won't melt off, but you will be in a swampy, marshy area. So here's a shot of this. So it's not really a bog, it's a fen. So a bog is a low-level area, low-lying area that's full of water. It's real swampy, it's real nasty. Imagine a bog is like a fish tank that has no pump. The water is going to get nasty. It's going to be gross. It's going to smell bad. A fen is like a fish tank that has a pump. So here's what's going on. The rock has been exposed. I'm going to talk about what's going on here later, because the forces that made all these features, it's all comes back to one thing. So tens of thousands of years ago, something happened that scraped the soil away. That thing also left cracks in the rock. And that allowed water underground to seep up through the rock. So imagine if you think back to our tray that we had in our classroom with the stream table. Imagine if I drilled down in that one tray and allowed water from the other one to come up. So these plants and animals can grow and be healthy because they have a steady supply of fresh water coming up underground. And peat is a type of plant, and we have the sand and gravel, and it forms these pools. It's perfect. So this is a nice, healthy area. It's not gross and nasty like a bog. But people called it a bog when they named it years ago because they didn't really know the geology of it as well as we do now. All right, Hocking Hills. This place is beautiful. Another place I definitely recommend you get to if you get a chance to. Hocking Hills, this is the same waterfall here in the spring, summer. here in the winter, right? So we can see how it's kind of freezing up this way. Hocking Hills is a lot of sandstone, and that sandstone was formed from sand that was deposited during the time period when Ohio used to be an ocean. So if you think about when I talked about Caesar Creek and the fossils you find there, the sandstone in Hocking Hills used to be sand in that ocean that those animals were living in. So there's this neat connection of all this. This is actually called Black Hand sandstone because in Hocking Hills, there was a petroglyph or design of a black handprint that was left behind by the Native American tribes that lived in the area. So that's how it gets its name. So Hocking Hills is a little bit longer. We're looking at a 2.5-hour drive. We're going a little bit more east right here, out this way. All the other sites were more north. This is more east, right? It's a great drive. And this is a thing that we're going to see. We're going to see weathering and erosion has opened up all these cave areas. Running water is going to be opening up these pathways, these channels, and it's going to cause more of that weathering and erosion. Moss growing on the rocks here. It's going to break down the rock even a little bit more. If we were to go there, this sandstone is really crumbly. It breaks apart easily. It weathers easily. So forces of wind, rain, snow freezing and thawing, or even rocks falling, or even people, unfortunately, cause weathering by scraping the rock. But there's a lot of sandstone that's being weathered and changed quickly. Okay, more north of here, Kelleys Island. Here it is. That is all of Kelleys Island right there. It's a landform of an island because it's surrounded by water completely. And Kelleys Island has some really neat features as well. So Kelleys Island is in Lake Erie, which is our next feature as well, of Ohio. And what formed Kelleys Island also formed Lake Erie, what also formed Hocking Hills, and formed all these other sites that we've talked about. Kelleys Island is 4.5 hours north from here. So here we are in Amelia. We're going to go straight up north. We would go right up to Sandusky, Ohio, and then we would have to hop a boat, and then that would take us to Kelleys Island that way. The number one thing that makes Kelleys Island so special is these limestone grooves. Kelleys Island is made out of limestone, which is something we talked about from Mammoth Cave. It's a sedimentary rock that's made from trillions of compact fossils of microscopic animals. And these grooves were made by a glacier that came north from Canada tens of thousands of years ago. And we're going to talk about that a lot more. We're going to talk about glaciers next week, because basically everything I showed you for Ohio in one way or another was made by a glacier. So this massive mountain of ice slowly moved across the land and left these marks in the limestone. These are the largest in the world. And many of them were destroyed when people 100 years ago or so mined out the limestone, but then this section was protected. So I want you to imagine if you've ever gotten a rock stuck in your shoe. I know I had this happen to me when I was a kid, where I had a rock stuck in my shoe and I thought it sounded neat. And I walked around, and then I realized I ended up making all these scratches in my mom's kitchen floor, my dad's kitchen floor. They were not happy at all that I left all these scratches in the floor. But I thought it was cool at the time, and I even knew that I was making scratches, and I made more because I thought it was neat. But then I didn't really stop to think, those scratches are going to stay there, and I'm going to get busted big time for it. So I want you to imagine this mountain of ice that's moving and picking up all these rocks and boulders. And just like that rock in my shoe that left all those scratches on my mom and dad's floor, scraped it across the rock. So this is an excellent example of glacial weathering, the best in the world. There are other examples, even small scratches, but these are the largest. You can lay down in this like a slide. It's really, really neat to see that. So here's another shot of that. And from these glacial grooves, we can see the direction the glacier was going in. Here's another amazing thing about Kelleys Island. Thankfully, this rock was preserved. This is a massive slab of limestone, and these are petroglyphs. These are carvings in that limestone that were left behind by Native Americans who lived in that area thousands of years ago. So when we think about people like the Paleo Indians, the Archaic, the Adena, the Hopewell, these people were living in this area as well. They were all over the place in Ohio. And these are carvings that were left behind on this limestone. This is an older photograph you can see, and thankfully it's been preserved. And here's a shot of that, kind of marking that out. And here's what we talked about when we talked about the effigy pipes in social studies. We don't know what these symbols mean. We can take guesses, but we really don't know what these images mean. Do they mean anything at all? Or were they just people killing time and just drawing like the way you draw on the side of your notebook paper? We don't know, right? So it's really amazing to see that. That's a historical part of Kelleys Island. And then here we are, Lake Erie, the lake that Kelleys Island is an island in. And Lake Erie is neat because along Lake Erie, you'll find lighthouses like this one. This is in Marblehead, Ohio. And here we have this lighthouse that is built literally right on the edge of the lake on this limestone as well. And it was built there to protect the ships from crashing ashore and marking the edge of the shoreline there. Lake Erie is also 4.5 hours away. Again, we're going to go up to Sandusky, Ohio, and as soon as you're there, you see the lake. So you can take a boat out into the lake, or you can stand on the shore and take a look at it. Lake Erie is part of the Great Lakes. So here we have Lake Ontario, Lake Erie, Lake Huron, Lake Michigan, Lake Superior. Now, if you remember, Niagara Falls, I mentioned that before. Niagara Falls is right here. So Lake Ontario goes through this channel and dumps out into Lake Erie. And all that water that goes over Niagara Falls is water coming from Lake Ontario into Lake Erie. And then Huron, Michigan, Indiana Dunes is right here. So Lake Michigan is right there, all the way up to Lake Superior, the largest of all of them, hence the name Lake Superior. So that's what Lake Erie looks like from the shore. That's it. Right there, that's the lake. The neat thing about Lake Erie, and we're going to talk about this painting a lot. And I want to tell you about it now, but I'm not going to because I have to save something for social studies. This painting shows something that happened in the War of 1812, that happened in the year 1812. And Lake Erie was in the middle of, literally in the middle of a lot of that fighting. So yet again, Ohio is in the middle of some major historic events. And this painting shows a major battle that took place on Lake Erie between battleships. So I want you to imagine the pirate-style battleship with the sails and the cannons, and they're going off, and there's chunks of wood going everywhere, and people are falling in the water. It's a great story. So we're going to talk about this later. It happened on Lake Erie. It's amazing. Another cool thing about Lake Erie and all the other lakes, the other Great Lakes, there are hundreds of shipwrecks in the Great Lakes. This is a picture of a shipwreck at the bottom of Lake Erie. There are hundreds of them. I even have a book in my classroom that is a treasure hunter's guide to the Great Lakes shipwrecks, because a lot of these ships, when they sank, they had a ton of valuable material on them. And some of it, wasn't anything major. It was not, I'm not talking like gold coins and gems, but some of them did have gold bricks or enough copper. And even though the copper's not, as fancy and glamorous as gold, but if you have enough of it, that's a lot of money. So there are shipwrecks from battles like what I just talked about in War 1812, and there are some shipwrecks where they were just hauling cargo and a storm kicked up and they sank. So if you Google Great Lakes shipwrecks, you're going to find a ton of really neat pictures. But yeah, that's a shipwreck in Lake Erie. That's it. It's incredible. All right. So what do these pictures have to do with it? Do you know what these things are? These are modern day pictures. So these are pictures of glaciers. These are these slowly moving rivers of ice that push their way across the land. You'll hear me say rivers of ice or mountains of ice, but they slowly move their way across the land and act just like a bulldozer. I want you to keep that in mind. So what I'm talking about, every single one of these features I talked about in Ohio, one way or another was made by a massive sheet of ice that came down from what's modern day Canada, came south, crushing everything in its path, and then slowly melted away. So, for example, you can see Kentucky, the glacier never got to Kentucky. So, if you ever drove through Kentucky and noticed how every square inch of Kentucky is covered in a hill, like, I don't know if there's any flat part of Kentucky at all. It's because the glacier never got there and crushed all those hills flat. On the other hand, if you've ever driven through Indiana and noticed how every square inch of Indiana is completely flat, well, it's because Indiana, at one point before it was Indiana, was completely flattened by the sheet of ice. For us, this is what it looked like for us. This part of Ohio, glaciated. This part of Ohio, unglaciated. What does that mean? This part of Ohio is going to be real flat. Now, that doesn't mean, yeah, we have hills in our area, but we are not going to have the really big hills or even the mountains that other places have. Think about if you've ever been to Gatlinburg, the mountains of Gatlinburg. You know why? No glacier ever got to that area. So when I talk about this part here, Lake Erie, all these Great Lakes were formed because when that gigantic river, that gigantic mountain of ice melts, that water needs to go somewhere. And that glacier dug out these holes, and when it melted, filled them back in again. That glacier, sorry, I'm going the wrong direction here. That glacier came through, picked up all these rocks along with it, and scraped them across the floor. See, I said the floor because I'm thinking about when I was a kid and I got in trouble. Scraped it across this rock, leaving a permanent scar on it. The glacier, when it was moving, it caused a lot of weathering and erosion when it melted, which weathered away this sandstone. This glacier, when it came through, scraped all the soil and cracked the rock underneath so Cedar Bog could be there. Okay, this glacier, when it melted, caused massive amounts of weathering and erosion that caused Clifton Gorge and caused these ravines and these openings. Okay, that glacier caused Caesar Creek to have the deposition that it had to cover up. So the spillway right here. So this, all of this comes back to this mountain, this river of ice that came through Ohio, going back to here, right here. These glaciers, so imagine these are modern day glaciers, but at one point covered most of Ohio. And if you want an idea of where we are, I'm sitting like right around this area. Where you're sitting right now, probably around this area right here. So we were right on the edge of it. It got this far, and then it started slowly melting away. All right, we'll be talking about glaciers more in another video. I'm trying to think of a way I can set up an experiment to show you guys here at home, or have you do one yourself, because unfortunately we can't all be in the room together and show you the same thing. So I'm going to try to come up with a plan B for this. Thank you for watching. If you need to go back and watch any more, of course, you are more than welcome to do that, or share this video with people. That would be great as well. All right, I hope you guys have a great day and enjoy the rest of it. Thank you very much.